Good morning, evening, or afternoon for those who are watching on YouTube. Thank you so much. I started reading and I did not go live yet. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, the page before it. And I'm going to, you missed my awesome Trump impersonation. So I am going to do it again. The Muslim ban, Trump versus Hawaii. Question: what is the most prominent lie that the American public is being propagandized with in regards to national security, in your opinion? Donald Trump. One of the lies, I think, is that fact that Muslims can come in, but other people can't. Christians can't come into this country, but Muslims can. Muslims can come in, but Christians can't. And the Muslims aren't in danger, and the Christians are. Iowa National Security Action Summit, May 16th, 2015. Point of Grace Church, Waukee, Iowa. And with no shame, unreal, the majority of the people coming into this country are Christians. They're Christians. And they're the ones who are getting kicked out. They're the ones getting deported. And they're the ones being blocked from entering the country. Now, that is peak irony. We're on Chapter 7, the Muslim ban, in case you missed it. Until the Santeria case, the court had never actually decided that the government was hostile towards religion. It had discussed the Constitution preventing hostility towards religion occasionally since 1844 and regularly since the mid-20th century. After all that talk, those years of hostility to religion playing a substantive and recurring role in the First Amendment jurisprudence. The Santeria case is the first time that it actually happened, wrote Professor Mark Sada. That's how rare this hostility is. It was just as rare in the 2 decades after the Santeria case. The court only cited the case to support a substantive decision twice, defending Line 3 both times. Once in 1997 to overturn the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, it applied to the states, and then again just before Roberts took over the court, rejecting a 2004 challenge brought by a crusader to say that not publicly funding theology scholarships wasn't hostility. Not paying to train ministers is not the same as legislating a church out of existence. In both cases, the court disagreed with Christians seeking privilege by arguing religious freedom. Hostility wasn't an issue. So the Santeria case was originally decided to vindicate the rights of a minority and then used twice to curb Christian privilege and defend Line 3. It remains rare, but in 2016, the crusading justice rediscovered the power of claiming government hostility toward religion. Please keep tapping the like. Thank you so much for checking the sound. Please keep tapping like. I love it. We're at 3,000 and 3,500. Please keep tapping and share this live. I would greatly appreciate it. I ain't tapping nothing, James Bond says. Okay, well, anyway, I'm glad you're here. You keep not tapping then. Me. The court's newfound fascination with hostility. Speaking of hostility, I am the captain now. Yes, thank you. Yes, you are the captain. This is your ship. The public opinion by claiming something is anti-religion, but also the lack of history. There's only one precedent to bind the crusade, the Santeria case. Unlike Line 3, which was countless cases in a long presidential line, hostility was putty in the justice hands, shaped and exploited to further the crusade. The argument was powerful, but real cases were vanishingly rare until Justice Alito wrote a 2016 opinion in Stormans Incorporated versus Weissman that began, "This case is an ominous sign." The owners of a pharmacy didn't want to dispense certain contraceptives because they believed that their God didn't like those particular drugs. Isn't that amazing? You know your God so well, he doesn't like certain drugs. I mean, fascinating, amazing that you could intuit that. But you can't figure out if your God is okay with women bleeding out in parking lots and being denied health care. Amazing. Yes, drugs are awesome. They can be. We love the TikTok shop. We love the TikTok drugs. Anyway, the refusal violated state law. Pharmacies are heavily regulated, and refusing to dispense prescriptions for non-medical reasons is a concern. Even so, religious pharmacists had an opt-out. The pharmacies had to promptly get patients their medicine. Two crusaders, the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Becket Fund, took the case to the Supreme Court, which declined to hear their case over Alito's written objection. He cited the Santeria case nearly 20 times, arguing that it is hard not to view the state's actions as exhibiting hostility towards religious objections. Roberts and Thomas agreed with Alito, but it takes 4 justices to hear a case. And the other potential vote, Scalia, died as the court was waiting for the state's brief. Alito's opinion suggested a drastically lower bar for what constitutes hostility towards religion. The bar, oh yes, Jesus is Lord, right. I don't even think Jesus would agree with that. In fact, I think he would be quite embarrassed to see you quoting that randomly in a live that isn't, it pertains to nothing at all of what we're talking about. But thank you for joining us. Anyway, from the Hialeah mob and targeted suppression down to a state rule that balances the needs of patients with pious pharmacist complaints, he also flipped that hostility so that instead of protecting a minority attacked by Christians abusing their civil power, it privileged conservative Christian ideology, aligned with Alito and the Crusade. Thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. It's sad when people say that shit. Yes, it is. But you know what? They need to hear this more than anybody else. Since then, the reshaped Supreme Court has applied Alito's reimagined hostility while citing the real hostility in the Santeria case. It's done so in majority opinions involving Christians' religious freedom nearly every year, including at least 9 crucial cases that furthered their crusade. First, to let churches access the public purse. Then, to let a Christian-owned business get away with discrimination against LGBTQ people. Then, to uphold a massive government-maintained Christian cross. Oh, my goodness. Next, to open the public treasury for Christian schools. Unbelievable. Do you think Jesus would even want to see a cross? I mean, think about that. Imagine Jesus coming back and seeing crosses everywhere. Why do Christians think? Why do Christians think that Jesus would want to see a cross? I mean, that's like handing out AR-15 pins to people who've survived mass unalivings at schools. I mean, seriously. Ugh. You know what? Maybe that's why Jesus hasn't come back. He hasn't come back because he's looking down and he's seeing all these people wearing crosses, and it's like, no, no, they missed the whole point. A cross is a torture device. It's excruciating. Why would you want to wear something like that? It's gross. And for slightly modified reasons, to let Catholic foster care charities discriminate against LGBTQ people. The court cited the Santeria hostility twice in 23 years, both times to curb Christian privilege. And then Alito's overhauled hostility 9 times in 5 years, each time to privilege Christians. This court wants to redefine religious freedom and understands the power in claiming hostility to do so. Thank you for the likes and shares. Please keep sharing and keep tapping. I appreciate that. Loving it. Trump campaigned on a Muslim ban. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what is going on, declared his campaign. Criticized for his open bigotry, Trump doubled down, tweeting, "That's right, we need a travel ban for certain dangerous countries, not some politically correct term that won't help us protect our people." He later amended his rhetoric slightly, a strictly political shift, he explained. In the debates, Trump said the Muslim ban still stands, but admitted that it got a rhetorical makeover. It's called extreme vetting. We're having problems with the Muslims, and we're having problems with Muslims coming into the country, Trump claimed, adding later, they want Sharia law. Even as the Supreme Court considered challenges to the Muslim ban, Trump was unrepentant. There's nothing to apologize for. A week after taking office, Trump implemented the Muslim ban with an executive order that banned citizens from 7 countries from entering the United States: Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. All Muslim majority countries. Isn't it amazing, though, that we never see huge uprisings of Muslims causing trouble in this country, and yet Christian nationalists are the most violent. They're the ones creating the most chaos. They're the ones doing the most unalivings. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that ironic? The Muslim ban banned Muslims, but also favored Christians. Well, did it favor Christians, though? Christians are getting deported. Thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. Christians are actually being deported. They're coming. But the difference is these Christians are brown people. And I guess that makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? Amazing. I'm just looking for a little consistency. That's all. That's all. This is just like the religious gerrymander in the Santeria case, except the good religious suppresses the scary minorities. This protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States order was enjoined 2 days later. Lawsuits and injunctions piled up. It was repeatedly challenged and struck down, and then rewritten after about 5 weeks. Same result, lawsuits and injunctions. Then, in September 2017, Trump signed Muslim Ban 3.0, which limited travel from 8 countries: Chad, Iran, Libya, North Korea, Somalia, Syria, Venezuela, and Yemen. Including North Korea and Venezuela, including those 2 countries, was a clumsy and conspicuous attempt to diffuse the anti-Muslim bigotry that motivated the order, to camouflage a religious gerrymander. None of the orders included Egypt or Saudi Arabia. I wonder why. Countries where most of the foreign terrorists that actually attacked this country came from, but when Trump also had significant personal financial interests. To ban 3.0 favored Christians and maliciously targeted Muslims, but with some clumsy camouflage and not in a way that might hinder terrorism or the Trump family's ability to borrow money. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments on Ban 3.0 in April 2018. Almost a lifetime ago, huh? Just 2 months before it released the opinion in the Cake case, restricting people's movements because of which God they worship or which holy book they revere is a threat to religious freedom. It's genuine hostility. It's also a slippery slope. The federal government can regulate interstate travel as well as immigration. And if it can prevent people from coming into the country on the basis of religion, can it stop religious minorities crossing state lines? Why can't it force them to live in certain areas, perhaps with badges, to clearly mark their status? 1930s Germany, anyone? Anybody? Bueller? Outlandish, but remember, Trump's team talked of a Muslim registry. Wow. I mean, the Dunning-Kruger is strong with this one. Trump himself refused to disavow the internment camps for Japanese Americans in camps during World War II, one of the most shameful episodes in American and Supreme Court history. This was a serious violation of religious freedom, an actual real hostility directed at a minority with the full force of the U.S. government. The Alliance Defending Freedom's president, Michael Farris, said, the test of a religious freedom is whether you're willing to stand up for the religious freedom of those you disagree with theologically. If so, the Crusaders failed. None defended the religious freedom of Muslims. Jay Sekulow, oh my gosh, that Looney Tune. America's Center for Law and Justice sent briefs to the Supreme Court arguing for the ban. 2 of the biggest ADF and Beckett Fund filed briefs that claimed to support neither side. An inexplicable approach to such a clear threat to religious freedom, unless their understanding of religious freedom centers on Christian privilege. Both dodged the media and telling changes of strategy that left a deafening silence. Both ostensibly impartial briefs actually argued for the ban. The Beckett Fund wrote, proper free exercise analysis would focus on the facts concerning specific plaintiffs, essentially arguing that every individual wishing to immigrate must litigate their own religious freedom, challenge to the ban separately. ADF's duplicity and Christian supremacy was even more stark. The same ADF attorney that argued the Kate case wrote the milquetoast brief. ADF argued that the lower court engaged in impermissible psychoanalysis of the president's heart of hearts. Thank you so much for checking the live. This is going to be another great morning. I hope so. I hope so. Well, I don't know. I had to shut my camera off because it kept blinking. I don't know why. It was starting to irritate me, so I just turned the camera off. Anyway, this background looks better than me anyway. ADF argued that the lower courts engaged in impermissible psychoanalysis of the president's heart of hearts. What heart? I didn't know Trump had a heart. Courts are not empowered to sift unofficial and passing comments in search of evidence discrediting officials' heart of hearts, which is precisely how ADF's client, the bigoted bakery, dodged justice. Thank you so much for the gifts. Thank you so much. Please keep tapping and keep sharing the live. I appreciate it. Good to see you, George, Roland, Lalulian, Blessed for Days. The Crusaders defended a ban that Trump repeatedly confessed targeted adherents of a non-Christian faith. Their hypocrisy is eloquent. Their mission is not to defend religious freedom, but to privilege Christianity. The court upheld the Muslim ban in a 5-4 opinion released 3 weeks after the Kate case. The cases are similar in time and argument, but the outcomes are contradictory. A manufactured hostility that at worst amounted to an inappropriate tone was enough to pollute an entire civil rights process that had already concluded and thereby allowed discrimination against an LGBTQ couple to stand. Bigotry spoken, tweeted, repeated, and defended was not enough to taint a ban that required multiple iterations to even begin to appear unbiased on its face, and this open hostility was insufficient for the same court to strike down discrimination against a stigmatized religious minority. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the Muslim ban opinion and argued that while there seemed to be bias, the court must accept other reasons Trump claimed for the ban because there is a persuasive evidence that the entry suspended has a legitimate grounding in national security concerns. Quite apart from any religious hostility, we must accept that independent justification. We don't have to accept shit. Thank you for the squirrels. Keep throwing the squirrels at me. I dodge all of them. Anyway, we don't have to accept shit. And we got to stop accepting this. In the face of Trump's clearly and oft-repeated bigotry and hostility, which started long before he had any national security clearance briefings or intelligence, Roberts clung to the fact that the text of the ban itself says nothing about religion. Oh my God, these people. These fundamentalist Christian nationalists, they lie through their teeth. Lie through their teeth. As long as they're lying for Jesus, it's okay. They're okay with it. Isn't that amazing? Thank you for the squirrel. Tinkermaid. Did I add you to the chat? I'll have to go back and double check. Huh. I thought I had added you. Let me write down before I forget. Unless it wouldn't let me add you. If you're not in the US for whatever stupid reason, it won't let me add you to our skeptic chat. I have a skeptic chat where all the members can. Yes, you. Did I add you to our chat, the skeptic chat? I thought I had. Well, I'll double check. I just don't remember seeing you in there. Anyway, where was I? And the court could not interfere that banning immigration from 5 Muslim majority countries by Muslim ban 3.0 was hostile toward religion because it wasn't a ban on immigration from all Muslim majority countries. The policy covers just 8% of the world's Muslim population, and some were security threats. Other than that, Roberts, Kennedy, and the other justices who had clutched their pearls at the tone of a commissioner in the Cake case didn't mention hostility at all. Apparently, it's not hostility unless it's directed at Christians. Yeah, for some reason, it won't let me add you, Year of the Snake. I think, for whatever reason, I think it's your name. I can't quite, I've tried adding you to the chat and it will not let me. It's like you're named, when I type out your name, I don't know. Is there any way you could change your name so it's easier? I don't know. I'll try again, but I've got your name written here and it will not let me. Oh, it's private. So it won't let me add private accounts. Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to keep that in mind. Okay, yeah, do that. I'll try again. I'll keep trying. We're not going to give up on you, man. Other than that, yeah. Whatever. I don't want to read that. Justice Sotomayor refuted this in her brilliant dissent and was joined by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They showed the ban's hostility. Quote, the full record paints a far more harrowing picture than Roberts recounted, and the ban was motivated by hostility and animus towards the Muslim faith. Sotomayor called out for conservative majority hypocrisy. The court recently found less pervasive official expressions of hostility and the failure to disavow them to be constitutionally significant. She adds that the majority utterly fails to address the fact showing hostility. As for the government sham national security camouflage, Sotomayor properly invoked the Santeria case, arguing that the government's asserted national security rationale reveals that the proclamation is nothing more than a religious gerrymander. Yes, thank you for saying it out loud. And cited the infamous Japanese internment case, which offered stark parallels and warned of upholding the government's actions based on a barren invocation of national security. Kennedy wrote the Santeria decision and the Cake decision, and in short, sad concurrence in the Muslim ban case. His progression from the Santeria decision in 1993 to the Bakery and the ban cases 25 years later mirrors the court's shift. Religious liberty was once a shield to protect hatred and stigmatize religious minorities from the hostility of the majority. But now, for this court, it's a cudgel to advance conservative Christianity. Thank you for the follow, Casey. I appreciate it. We'll pick up the threads of fabricated hostility again. But first, we need to examine the last case, the final barrier that stands between the Crusaders and the fully weaponized religious freedom. Chapter 8. It was never about the drugs. Time for me to wet my whistle. Man, I am breezing through this book. I thought it was going to be harder to get to, but I do appreciate the way Seidel writes. Yes, he does. He has to write lawyerese jargon, but he does it in such a way that it doesn't tie my tongue in a knot. And we got through the first chapter in 23 minutes. Amazing. Here we go. Let's see. Let's look at chapter 8. Oh, this is nothing. I'll be finished sooner than I thought. They were fired because they were drug counselors at a drug and alcohol treatment center. Oregon Attorney General David B. Frohmeyer, during the oral argument of Employment Division, November 6, 1989. Man, the war on drugs is ever with us. Have you noticed that? I tell you what, we are so backwards as a country. We are backwards. Just, I mean, in the way we treat drug addictions and the way we treat, it's just amazing. And meanwhile, you got a moron in the Oval Office taking ketamine. you know, high. And then you've got the, what's it? The Adderall sniffer in chief, Trump. I mean, at one point he had chunks of Adderall coming out of his nose as he was speaking. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's definitely by design. Yes, indeed. You know, it's by design. They're trying to get us to question our own reality, our sanity. And they do this. They're wearing us down. This is how they do it. They wear us down until we just give up and say, "Oh, I just want to live my life. I don't have time to fight this." Blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, 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 no. The civil rights leaders fought long and hard. I mean, before the civil rights era, before the Civil Rights Act was passed, I mean, go back 50 years before that. And what you're going to see is just a long line of misery, a long line of abuse, murders, lynchings, even. So I'm sorry, but if Black women in this country can get back up and keep on going and fight, and they just keep fighting, they haven't quit, how in the name of fuck am I going to stand back and stand by and do nothing? Fuck that. No, no, no. As long as there are Black women in the fight, I have no excuse to sit back and do nothing. And if all it takes is me getting on live, I'll do it. Anyway, moving on. Chapter 8. The court wrote such a strong, definitive opinion in the Santeria case, partially to repulse congressional pressure. That stemmed from a 1990 opinion in which the court strongly and correctly defended line 1, line 2. In that 1990 case, the court explained that religious believers, non-Christians in the case, must comply with secular laws. Oh. Spitting facts. Well, I'm trying. It's an uncontroversial conclusion, but the opinion stands as precedent between the Crusaders and a weaponized religious freedom. The opinion has been attacked, maligned, all but overturned, even though it's basically correct. The fight to overturn the 1990 precedent made for strange bedfellows. Crusaders favoring unemployment compensation for hallucinogenic drug users and vilifying an opinion by notorious arch-conservative Justice Antonin Scalia, a hero of theirs in every other respect, aligned with liberals disparaging the opinion because Scalia doled out bigotry and ethnocentrism with his characteristic venom. Liberals and conservatives united against the court to pass a new federal superstatute reinterpreting religious freedom. That's okay. No, I turned my camera off. How we got to this point, Richard, is because white people decided it was too tough and too hard, and they checked out. I am reminded of George Carlin, who in one of his specials said, on election day, I don't vote. I stay home. I stay home on election day. And this apathy has had effects like you wouldn't believe. And the voter turnout, even amongst white people, has just gone down and down and down. And it was, I mean, Trump is in office today because white Democrats stayed home on election day. I'll say that again. Trump is in office today because white Democrats stayed home on election day. We have nobody to blame but ourselves. Black people turned up, they showed up and turned out and stood 10 toes down. They were there. Where were we? Huh? Come on, white people. Where were we? Where are we? Do you have a plan? In 2028, there's going to be a midterm. Are you going to be at the polls? I don't want to hear any excuses. I don't want to hear any, well, my favorite candidate didn't get, nominated, so I'm just going to sit out. I'm telling you what, we need to get our heads out of our collective asses and start taking this democracy seriously. A republic, if you can keep it. Are we keeping it? No, we're not. We're not. And all because some of us didn't have our favorite pet issues addressed and mentioned. So we justified our lack of voting. Unbelievable. I would have voted for the wheelchair of FD fucking R over Donald Trump. Since when does Donald Trump become a choice? When does that happen? Have our minds been broken to the point where we can't tell fact from fiction? We can't tell the difference between a demagogue and someone who's serious about the political process and what it takes to govern? Do we give a shit, white people? And I hold myself in contempt as well. Moving on. Crusaders, the roadmap, weaponized religious freedom, given how low the myth, yeah. Religions love drugs. Wine is the blood of Christ for some. Rastafarians smoke marijuana to elevate their consciousness. Aztecs ate mushrooms. The Incas chewed coca leaves. And some Native Americans take peyote. The peyote rite became the focus of this Supreme Court case. But the case was never really about religion or the right. It was about the unemployment benefits. More specifically, whether a private drug counseling organization can fire drug counselors who do drugs in violation of the organization's policy. Obviously, it can. But does religious freedom require the state to pay unemployment benefits to private drug counselors who took drugs and were therefore fired for cause? That uncontroversial proposition, drug counselors can't do drugs and keep their jobs, lay at the heart of the Supreme Court case, but was lost in Scalia's opinion. The backlash and the new law that backlash spawned. The drug counselors were Galen Black and Al Smith, alcoholics in recovery who wanted to help others recover. Both got jobs with Douglas County Council on on alcohol and drug abuse prevention and treatment, a mouthful known as ADAPT. Despite the name, it wasn't a government agency. ADAPT is a private drug rehabilitation organization in Oregon, a 501c3. ADAPT treatment philosophy was that alcoholism and drug addiction are continuing diseases that require total abstention. Any alcohol or non-prescription drug use, however minor, was grounds for an employee's dismissal. Both men knew about the policy when they were hired. Each signed a copy of the rules on drug use. Smith knew that ADAPT considered peyote a drug. Smith was a member of the Klamath tribe, a Native American. Interesting. Both were affiliated with the Native American Church, but neither were full members. So when Black asked Smith about taking peyote, he sent Black to the church to ask around. Black went, talked with a leader, and ate peyote in a ceremony. That was about a year after he began working as an addiction counselor. ADAPT suspended Black. A counselor at the VA hospital evaluated Black during his suspension and recommended intensive personal counseling or a residential inpatient care facility for drug and alcohol and drug abuse. Black refused. Because of the drug use, his refusal of treatment, his alcoholism, and most importantly, his position as a drug counselor at a private facility with the abstinence policy that he had signed, Black was fired. Fired for cause. Drug counselors can't do drugs. Like ADAPT, Smith initially thought of peyote as a drug. To me, peyote is a drug. I'm not about to jeopardize my sobriety. But after trying peyote in 1979, before working at ADAPT, he reevaluated and began to think peyote would potentially help addicts and alcoholics. After Black's initial suspension, Smith discussed peyote with ADAPT's executive director, who reminded Smith that any drug use, including peyote, was against ADAPT policy. The men recall the meeting very differently. According to the executive director, Smith left furious, but recommitted to ADAPT's strict drug use policy. Smith instead remembers Adapt issuing a challenge to his religion. I can't go to church, he remembers thinking. The next months were tense for the Native American community, which was worried about Black, the white interloper, suing for racist discrimination as he was threatening to do, or taking a religious freedom case featuring their sacred right. Black's VA counselor had corresponding concerns and thought Black's sudden fascination with Native American religion was extreme and indicated a tendency toward obsessive compulsiveness. About 6 months after Black was fired, Smith received an envelope full of eagle feathers. Interesting. An invitation to a peyote ceremony. He met with ADAPT's executive director, and explained that he planned to take peyote that weekend and took peyote. The following Monday, Smith told ADAPT that he had taken peyote and after declining to resign, was fired. Two drug counselors who knowingly took drugs against the policy of their employer, a drug rehabilitation facility, was fired for using drugs. I, like Al Smith, and I love his FU, stand behind his employer. He was fighting for his identity, one of many such stands he'd taken in his life. Smith got himself sober on January 15, 1957, and stayed sober until his death in November 19, 2014. At 95, Al Smith, like Native America, had refused to vanish. Drinking didn't kill him, neither did tuberculosis, nor the Army, nor the federal penitentiary, wrote Garrett Epps, whose book on this case is invaluable. The Catholic Board and Bureau of Indian Affairs schools that were meant to civilize and Christianize savages didn't break or kill him, though they proved lethal to thousands. Yes, indeed. Yeah, the boarding schools were hell on earth for Native American children. Al Smith rebelled and escaped. There's an element of this history in ADAPT's abstinence rules. The U.S. suppressed Native American religions to Christianize them and civilize them, as historian Patricia Nelson Limerick detailed. This included suppressing old heathenish dances, medicine man, heathenish rites, and traditional healing ceremonies. Smith took a principled stand against ADAPT's rule. He argued that peyote was acceptable within the parameters of ADAPT's abstinence recovery, partly because it was religious and partly because it wasn't a drug that compromised sobriety. He thought it might even be a recovery tool. Oh, really? You mean like ketamine? That could help alcoholics, especially Native Americans. This remarkable man made an admirable stand. He argued, and ADAPT didn't agree. At least not then. After this case ended and ADAPT's executive director left for private practice, he agreed. The reality is that there are a lot of people with alcohol and drug problems who recover in all sorts of different ways, not just abstinence. Smith's stand is admirable, but admiration does not create a constitutional right. Black, a less sympathetic figure, has been written out of the story or rewritten as a devout Native American rather than an obsessive, compulsive white guy, but his case went to the Supreme Court too. When Galen Black was fired, he asked Oregon for unemployment compensation. The employment appeals bond denied the benefits because Black was fired for misconduct. Drug counselors can't do drugs. Smith was denied benefits for the same reason. Interesting. That's harsh. American social safety net is callous, often deliberately so at Christianity's urging. So we'll explore it in chapter 16. The focus on why people need help rather than the need is somewhat cruel. Politicians are possessed by fears of malingering or deceit, as the court once phrased it. That and a healthy dose of racism. Extending benefits to everyone's benefits to everyone who's unemployed, whether the reason is more humane. But under the harsh system, the denial of benefits was proper because they were fired for cause. Black and Smith each independently appealed to the Oregon Supreme Court, then to the U.S. Supreme Court, which combined their cases, accepted review, and issued a long opinion that sent the cases back down for additional findings, including whether or not sacramental peyote use was illegal. The U.S. Supreme Court also seems to have regretted taking the case. Scalia even said, had we known that, we wouldn't have granted cert in the case. It kicked the case back down to the Oregon Supreme Court, which said that peyote use violates Oregon criminal law and there is no religious exemption. The combined case then went back to the U.S. Supreme Court. The complicated undulations confused a rather simple issue. The question was whether the state could deny workers unemployment benefits because they were fired for misconduct. For there to be a religious freedom question under the Constitution, there must be a government action that burdens religion. There was no government burden on the drug counselor's religion. None. When they first accepted the job, the government wasn't involved. The government didn't force them to decide between a paycheck and religion. Black and Smith decided when they accepted the job. They willingly compromised their religious beliefs. When they were fired, both were unburdened by the employer's religious restrictive policy. That freedom wouldn't change whether they get unemployment benefits or not. In other words, by the time they asked the state for unemployment benefits, there was no burden on their religion, no matter how that request was handled. There was no state burden on their religion, regardless of whether or not religious peyote use was illegal, because the benefits denial was tied to their work as drug counselors, not to criminal law. Whatever the criminal law said, they would still have been fired for cause. The only possible burden from the state came from the for cause aspect of the employment benefit scheme. But that then shifts the question back to the employer. It was the employer's policy, and it was legitimate. A drug counseling organization with rules about drug counselors doing drugs, which the men agreed to, is not a state burden on their religion. This is a privately imposed burden willingly accepted in return for a paycheck. The men weren't powerless, though. Either could have sued ADAPT. Black would have had a hard time arguing racial discrimination, but not Smith. Both could have sued for religious discrimination. Instead, they chose not to challenge their firing. Smith didn't argue that ADAPT had no right to fire him. This is not a wrongful discharge claim and does not challenge the employer's decision to fire Al Smith, only the state's denial of unemployment benefits, as the lower court explained. Black and Smith were fired because of the nature of their jobs, not the religious ritual they engaged in. Religious freedom was not an issue. The central point of that case is that they were ineligible for unemployment benefits because they were fired for misconduct. Drug counselors can't do drugs. ADAPT had rules and policies, no alcohol or drug use by employees. And anyone, regardless of their religion or reason for doing drugs on the legality of the drugs, could also have been fired. Imagine another scenario. These two men, self-described alcoholics in recovery, get drunk. Alcohol is legal. They broke no law but transgressed the employer's rules they agreed to and which are central to the organization's mission. They refused treatment and get fired. They don't have a right to unemployment benefits because a right to alcohol is spelled out in the 21st Amendment. It's harsh, but not a constitutional violation. ADAPT would have taken the same action had the claimant consumed wine at a Catholic ceremony or any drug anywhere. It would be the same result, noted the lower court. So this was a failure of imagination and a missed opportunity. If they had gone in with religious discrimination instead, we would have been hearing a different case. The central issue was the nature of their employment, not their religion or the legality of peyote. Justice Harry Blackmun, who dissented in the final opinion, asked Oregon's Attorney General, "Mr. Attorney General, why were these people fired?" The Oregon AG responded, "They were fired because they were drug counselors at a drug and alcohol treatment center. So they were fired because they violated an employer's policy." That is right. They were not fired because of use of peyote was illegal. That is correct. Oregon explained that under its law, illegal conduct was not necessarily enough to fire them, but the violation of a valid job-related requirement was. The criminal laws around peyote and any possible religious exemptions to those laws were a massive distraction. Oregon exempted religious uses of peyote from the criminal statutes after the case, but that would not have changed anything in this case. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court asked the Oregon Supreme Court to rule on the illegality of peyote and religious uses and extensively discussed it in the final opinion. The unnecessary, arrogant challenge Scalia issued at the end of the opinion, which caused massive backlash, stemmed from this irrelevant query. What the court got right. The majority opinion reached the correct outcome and clearly explained line 1 and 2. There's no distinction between belief and action. The free exercise of religious means, first and foremost, the right to believe and profess whatever religious doctrine one desires. Scalia wrote of line 1, to make this point, Scalia quoted Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists. The legislative powers of the government reach actions only and not opinions. That's line 2. And it's from the very same letter the Supreme Court quoted in 1878, which gives us the useful metaphor for line 3, wall of separation between church and state. Favorably quoting that letter is reason enough for the Crusaders to target this opinion for destruction. But the opinion also reinforces the boundaries of all 3 lines. If religious freedom is to be weaponized, this case must fall. The opinion reiterates that there cannot be a right for religion to be exempt from any law that conflicts with the religion. This is particularly important when the laws are broad, neutral, and generally applicable. That is, when the laws do not target religious worship, as in the Santeria or Muslim ban cases. Traffic laws apply to everyone, even to people who want to let Jesus take the wheel. They don't target solely those believers. I can't believe there are people in this world that have actually taken that and actually tried to implement that. How lame do you have to be? How lame do you have to be? Jesus take the wheel. Right. Wow. Not only did the court defend line 2, it explained that even when another person's rights are not violated, a religious freedom right may not exist. The opinion explains with an analogy to taxes and freedom of the press, another hallowed First Amendment right. Taxes don't prohibit the free exercise of religion of citizens who believe, support, or of organized government to be sinful, any more than taxes on the book you are holding abridge the freedom of the press. It simply cannot be the case that a religious command is automatically exempt from the civil law. Any society adopting such a system would be courting anarchy, but that danger increases in direct proportion to the society's diversity of religious beliefs and its determination to coerce or suppress none of them. Well, that's correct. Automatic exemptions for every believer would be unattainable, especially in America, precisely because we are a cosmopolitan nation made up of people of almost every conceivable religious preference, and precisely because we value and protect that religious divergence. We cannot afford the luxury of deeming presumptively invalid, as applied to the religious objector, every regulation of conduct that does not protect an interest of the highest order. All correct. The court then listed some of its many cases that rejected automatic exemptions for any religious objection. Under the automatic exemption theory, it would have had to grant religious freedom, exempting from paying taxes, manslaughter, and child neglect laws, traffic laws, minimum wage laws, child labor laws, environmental protection laws, and laws providing for equality of opportunity, among others. Scalia even included compulsory vaccination laws as an obvious and clear instance in which religion gets no exception. This is a measure of the court's extreme ideological shift and the success of Leo. Scalia summed it up like this, quoting an opinion from more than a century earlier. To make an individual's obligation to obey such a law contingent upon the law's coincidence with his religious beliefs, except where the state's interest is compelling, permitting him by virtue of his beliefs to become a law unto himself, contradicts both constitutional tradition and common sense. He's correct. This case has become a target for the Crusaders because of what it got right, but it became a target for liberals because of what it got wrong. What the court got wrong. Scalia didn't need to defend the two lines in this case because religious freedom was irrelevant. The only issue was the nature of men's employment. The court could have simply explained that it is within a drug counseling facility's power to discharge drug counselors who use drugs, especially when that is a policy the drug counselors have signed. Such discharges are necessarily for cause, are unrelated to the sanctity or illegality of the drugs, but are related to the ability of the drug counselor to counsel addicts. The court could have explained this empathetically in an opinion, but put the blame where it belonged, on ADAPT and the state's draconian unemployment requirements. But Scalia was temperamentally incapable of writing such an opinion. Instead, the court used the irrelevant illegality of peyote to distinguish this case from previous religious unemployment decisions that extended unemployment benefits to minor Christian sects, which proved to be a mistake. Really, the court erred by letting Scalia write the opinion and focusing on the irrelevant question of whether religious peyote use was illegal or not. Those two errors were like a match that set alight a swirling mix of explosive ingredients. Explosive ingredient number one. As they often do, the justices considered issues outside Smith and Black's case. It was never about the drugs. The justices had been worried about a runaway train. Scalia expressed that regret at oral argument. Had we known that, we wouldn't have granted cert in that case. When he realized the case was not quite the opportunity to stop the runaway train he first believed. Earlier cases, including the unemployment religion cases mentioned in the next chapter, were about to undo the lines the court defended here. The defense was unnecessary in this particular case, but not, thought the justices, in the jurisprudence more broadly. One scholar who delved deeply into the private papers of the justices observed that for over a decade before this case was decided, they were preoccupied with whether the court could put the brakes on this constitutional runaway train. That is, would the court make it clear that the obligation to obey the civil law is not contingent on its coincidence with religious beliefs? Would it hold the lines? So the court was stretching outside the facts of the case to put the brakes on that train. Mandatory exemption for believers from any and every law to stave off lawlessness, and it chose the worst possible engineer. Explosive ingredient number two. Scalia often wrote dissents, and usually with an acid pen. He'd be near the middle of today's wretchedly conservative court, but during his time, Scalia was on the fringe. Again, this is a mark of the court's capture, not shifting legal thought. Scalia's conservative views were unpopular, and his infamous claim, "My Constitution is dead," adding "it's dead, dead, dead," in another occasion, found little support. His consistent inability to persuade his fellow justices to accept his fringe views led to venomous dissents. Scalia admitted that he writes with the verve and panache he does in part to ensure that his opinions are included in constitutional law casebooks, where they will influence the next generation of lawyers and legal scholars. His flamboyant invective, everything from pure applesauce to jiggery pokery, drew the popular media's focus, increasing his influence. Scalia was also a bigot. His guiding judicial philosophy, originalism, is inherently bigoted. Originalism freezes the meaning of laws in our Constitution in the time they were first passed, at a time when women, blacks and LGBTQ people, Native Americans and non-believers and others were not considered humans worthy of rights and were at the mercy of white Christian men like Scalia. Scalia's bigotry worked its way into his decisions, speeches, and writings. Explosive ingredient number three. The United States has a long, evil history of abusing Native Americans, and the Supreme Court itself had just added a fresh wound to this litany of abuse. After the court agreed to review the drug counselors' cases, but before issuing a final decision, it handed another loss to Native American religions, which, like the peyote case, also led to congressional legislation rebuffing the judiciary. The U.S. Forest Service was considering paving a new 6-mile-long road through the Chimney Rock area of the Six Rivers National Forest in northwestern California and harvesting virgin timber in that roadless track. The area is sacred to the local tribes, which use it for religious worship. As required by federal law, the USFS commissioned a study of the project's environmental impact, which found that the entire area is significant as an integral and indispensable part of Indian religious conceptualization and practice, and that any road would cause serious and irreparable damage to the sacred areas. The report recommended not building the road. The USFS decided to build it anyway and log or clear cut more than 700 million board feet of timber. Native Americans and environmental groups challenged that decision. The Supreme Court okayed the road. It wrongly said that this local, nuanced, highly studied, and individualized government action, building a road through virgin wilderness selected from one of many plans, was no different from a universal and neutral law that requires every single citizen to have a social security number, even if their religion said otherwise. There's nothing universal about the individualized road-building logging project. Their religion depended on this wilderness remaining wild. They can't just build or find another sacred wilderness. The government would have made their exercise of religion impossible, and the court was fine with that. The court's decision was so entirely unnecessary because Congress stepped in and saved the area by creating the Siskiyou Wilderness 5 years before the court got the case. Once again, the court's eagerness to decide an issue it need not have decided led to a bad decision. Had the court demurred, public opinion would have been primed to see its First Amendment maneuvering as racist and ethnocentric. The Supreme Court's first decision in Smith and Black's case came just a week after the wilderness opinion. The cases were still linked in the public mind when the Supreme Court handed down the final decision on the drug counselors 2 years later. These ingredients created a heightened danger of the court, enshrined an ethnocentric view of what constitutes religion in the United States, as Smith and Black lawyer warned during oral arguments. This danger, paired with Scalia's bigotry and arrogance, detonated a religious freedom firestorm. The explosion. The court held the lines, but it didn't need to, and Scalia couldn't limit himself to those lines or to be civil, conciliating, and empathetic opinion. He almost made it, but in the last substantive paragraph before the conclusion, Scalia basically told all minorities, too bad. He noted that some states exempted religious use of peyote from criminal laws, which didn't matter, and then in a phrase that would come to symbolize the case that would lead to a massive national push for superstatute privileging religion, Scalia wrote, It may fairly be said that leaving accommodation to the political process will place at a relative disadvantage those religious practices that are not widely engaged in, but the unavoidable consequence of democratic government must be preferred to a system in which each conscience is a law unto itself, or which judges weigh the social importance of laws against the centrality of all religious beliefs. The exemption for religions must come from democratic process, and minorities should expect to lose, is how this has been read. The New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, and a host of legal scholars quoted the passage. Members of Congress often quoted the phrase when they debated restoring religious freedom with legislation to undo Scalia's opinion, which even the most obtuse observer could have predicted when reading the words unavoidable consequence of democratic government. It's a harsh sentence delivered by a powerful white Christian man to a sympathetic Native American, and another now portrayed as such. The phrase unavoidable consequence of a democratic government from Scalia's pen consummated liberal fears of an ethnocentric First Amendment. Liberals loathe this decision because it suggests that all religious minorities are second-class citizens under the First Amendment. It also reinforced an image of a court hostile to Native Americans. And because Scalia wrote those words, not just another justice, the Christian supremacy and ethnocentrism were more palpable. It's hard to think Scalia, a Catholic who believed in the literal devil, would have decided this case the same way had it been two Catholics fired for taking communion wine, which Adapt said it would have done. Crusaders loathe this decision for different reasons. In fact, the Crusaders of today are fighting to overturn the decision precisely because it fails to do what liberals at the time were so worried about. It fails to enshrine Christian supremacy in the First Amendment. Scalia's defense of the lines has proven to be the major roadblock to that goal. The Crusaders mounted their assault on this precedence because of what it got right. Liberals attacked it for the racism they rightly read in Scalia's words. But on the issue of religious freedom, everyone was aligned against the High Court. Al Smith continued to fight for Native American rights his whole life. Galen Black is alive and is being used by First Liberty Institute as a pawn to further the crusade. The Institute filed a brief with the Supreme Court representing Black in Philadelphia case we'll cover in Chapter 16. And had him do the same in a case the Institute itself is litigating about the prayer-pushing football coach discussed in Chapter 4. In each case, Black argues for Christian privilege. End of Chapter 8. We'll get into Chapter 9 on our next live. Restoring Christian Supremacy. You don't want to miss. We are almost in the middle of the book. And for those of you on YouTube, thank you so much for staying with us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if you can, please order your own copy of American Crusade by Andrew Seidel.